Now, 1590 KLIV presents Inside Silicon Valley, a look at the issues and the people affecting Silicon Valley. Now, here's your host, President and CEO of Joint Ventures Silicon Valley, Russell Hancock.
If you've been to Downtown Redwood City lately, you know that it's a terrific spot. It's full of inviting restaurants, has a fantastic theater district, a majestic old courthouse, plazas with farmers markets. All of it is walkable and family-friendly. It's a beautiful and comfortable cityscape, and judging by all the people, it's a magnetic one. It wasn't always this way. Redwood City's downtown marks a remarkable transformation from urban decay to an award-winning example of vibrance and vitality. So how did it happen? Well, there were scores of players and visionaries, and they all worked hard to make it happen, making hard choices about trade-offs and investments. But one of them stands out as pivotal, and that is Zack. He is Redwood City's Downtown Development Coordinator. Mr. Zack is an urban planner, and he serves on the board of the Congress for the New Urbanism. And for over 15 years, he has been transforming places ranging from small rural communities to large metropolitan cityscapes. Mr. Zack devised the first performance-based public parking system in the United States. And he's also worked on form-based codes, architectural design guidelines, historic preservation, citywide comprehensive plans, and regional transportation plans. Dan's projects have won awards from the American Urban Planning Association, the Congress for the New Urbanism, the City of Fresno, also the Grand Boulevard Initiative here locally in Silicon Valley. And he lectures extensively on these subjects and especially about how well-designed density can create dynamic communities. So he has agreed to talk to us on air. He's our guest today on Inside Silicon Valley, and I'm eager to start this conversation. Dan, thank you for being our guest on the program.
Well, thanks for having me, Russ. It's great to be here.
Let's go back to the very beginning. Tell us about Redwood City before the transformation.
Well, Redwood City is a very old city. It's the oldest city between San Francisco and San Jose. It started in the 1850s. It got its name not from redwood trees that were growing there, but because it grew up around a shipping port. It was the furthest point inland where you could ship redwood that was logged in the Santa Cruz Mountains and ship it up to San Francisco during the gold rush boom. And so because of that shipping activity with those redwood lumber, that's how we got the name Redwood City.
It still has a port.
Still has a port.
A lot of people don't realize that.
Right, and the port used to be downtown, right at Broadway and Main Street, where we now actually have the Marshall Street parking garage. If you park there, you're parking on the port. There's actually an old brick building on Main Street that backs up to that garage that still has a hitch for ships to tie to, and it's still there. And so the port now is out on Seaport Boulevard. It was moved in the 1930s. The creek and the downtown leg of the creek used to silt up pretty bad, and so they moved it out to deeper channels, and it's still a major industrial port to this day. Yeah. Okay. So downtown Redwood City was the county seat when San Mateo County was broken off from San Francisco County, and was the primary city in that area for quite some time, and had a great, vibrant downtown up until the 1950s or 1960s. You know, you had Woolworths, JCPenney's, Montgomery Ward's. It was a major shopping destination and it's still an important place, but then it went into a decline just like so many American downtowns in the middle of the 1900s.
And can you describe why that decline took place?
Well, there were a whole host of factors. Some of it was, part of the nationwide epidemic that was going on at that time of people staying indoors more to watch TV, getting around by freeway, going to malls and these outlying places, housing sprawl that was happening everywhere, pulling people further and further away from these traditional centers. And then locally, what compounded it for Redwood City was things like being, dead center between two major regional malls, Stanford and Hillsdale, that were both very successful and drew out a lot of the shopping and things like that. And the old nature of the downtown with the small blocks, small parcels, and just some of the tighter historic conditions that had always benefited it, and that part of history worked as a liability. And those things weren't appreciated in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, like they are again today. It's come back into style. Everybody likes these, small historic areas and the walkable nature of them, and small sites pencil out again. But for a while there, it was out of vogue, and Redwood City suffered from that.
So how did the transformation process get started?
Well, it's been something that the people of Redwood City have been working at for quite some time. It really began in earnest in the late 1990s, and the city manager at the time, Ed Everett, and the council made a concerted push to make downtown a focus. They used a city parking lot for a really nice housing complex called City Center Plaza, ground floor retail, apartments above, all wrapping central courtyards. It was very much ahead of its time. That came in the late 90s. These things are commonplace now, but these were still cutting-edge ideas at the time, and they had the foresight to make it happen.
Was there resistance?
There was not tremendous resistance from what I understand. That was a couple of years before I joined the city, but people had really been wanting downtown to come back to life for quite some time. And so my understanding of it is that these first projects were well received and were well liked. Right next to the City Center Plaza project was also the new City Hall that was built, and it was built with brick and a tile roof, it's very modern, but it fits in well with the historic library across the street and other things. And so those were that was the beginning stages of the Renaissance. That was a sign that Redwood City appreciated its downtown. It appreciated the physical patterns that were there, and it was building on those rather than trying to do suburban style office parks and apartment complexes that went against the grain of what was historically there. That was the first real big sign that they appreciated it and were building on it and were serious about it.
Okay, so some projects jump-started this transformation, but then what happened?
So the big catalysts came online between 2005 2007. And so this was kind of phase two. So I came on board in 2003. I was brought in by the community development director at the time, Bruce Leadstrand. He had been city manager of Mountain View in the 80s. Spearheaded the Shoreline Amphitheater, the makeover of Castro Street, and really turned that town around. He had retired and was coaxed out of retirement by Redwood City to temporarily serve as the community development director. They told him it would be 6 months. It ended up being several years. But he really got things going in a big way. And so there were a couple of things that came on during that time. One is the Century Theaters. And so he using the redevelopment agency to assemble a site, to get financing, build a public parking garage, and get a private developer on as a partner. A 20-screen Cineplex was created with 4,200 seats and relocated the existing Century Theater site from the outskirts of town right into the heart of downtown and expanded it.
It was there right off of 101.
That's right.
And that was new construction as well.
Yeah, it probably dated from the 80s, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. I can't recall the exact date, but it wasn't very old. But Century saw the benefit of expanding and moving downtown. There's been a bit of a national trend for downtown movie theaters, and the movies seem to benefit from being in that mixed-use, walkable environment and having some synergy with surrounding uses. You can make the movie-going experience more of a night out on the town rather than just driving to a parking lot and walking to the movies. And then if you want to go anywhere else, get anything to eat, you have to drive away again. You come to downtown Redwood City or any of the other great downtowns with downtown cinemas, and you make a whole night of it. You can eat, you can go see the movie, you can go get dessert afterwards. If you're out on a date with the missus, you get a cocktail or whatever the case may be. Shopping, and you can make a whole day of it or a whole night of it, and it's a much better movie-going experience. And so we've been lucky to benefit from that trend. Mm-hmm. Right around the same time, another thing that we did that was a big boon was the creation of Courthouse Square and the restoration of the San Mateo County Courthouse.
Tell our listeners all about that.
So the San Mateo County Courthouse was built in 1906. about a month before the earthquake. The whole thing was destroyed and rebuilt in 1910. The only thing that survived was the dome, interestingly. In 1939, as part of the New Deal, the WPA built an annex to it. And unfortunately, they ripped off the front of the building in order to attach the annex, and they built over the historic town square that had been there in order to have a site for this annex. The annex on its own right wasn't a bad building. It was kind of a classic, WPA Art Deco building, but the damage that it did to the urban fabric and the historic Beaux-Arts courthouse building was not a good thing. And so, in 2005, we demolished the annex and reconstructed the facade of the historic courthouse. It was a really special project, and I don't know if in my whole career I'll be able to work on something as special as this again. It's definitely a once in a career kind of project. And so when you see the Redwood City Courthouse, about half of what you see on the front of the building is brand new, and you cannot tell the old from the new. We actually had a quarry in Northern California reopened that had been closed for 20 or 30 years because this was the only place we could get the stone to match. It's a very unique stone called Calusa sandstone. Nothing matched it right other than this. So the owner, fell in love with the project and was willing to reopen this quarry, and we got enough stone to finish the project. Up high, it's synthetic materials that match perfectly, and down low, the things that you can touch are the real stone that we got from this formerly closed quarry to make it all work. And so what's great about Courthouse Square is it's right at the heart of things, in the corner of Broadway and Middlefield, the 100% corner. So on one corner you have Courthouse Square. Diagonally from that, on the other corner, you have Century Theaters. Across the way from the courthouse, you have the historic Fox Theater, which has been restored and is now a great live music venue. And so right there at that one intersection, you've got these three gems that are just fantastic. And Courthouse Square creates a wonderful civic exclamation point to the whole thing. I think about us relative to some of the other downtowns in the area, and the peninsula is really lucky to have this great chain of downtowns along the Caltrain corridor that are just all wonderful. But one thing that sets us apart is that Courthouse Square. We can ultimately get some of the other great things that the other great downtowns have that we're still lacking. Like there's not a lot of retailing, for example, yet. But no one's ever going to be able to get this Courthouse Square, that courthouse, that grand civic space that we have, and so that really sets us apart and it makes it special. And I've got to tell you, I take my kids to the movie theater all the time, and when you come out of the movie lobby and you enter out onto Middlefield, which we've nicknamed Theater Way, the first thing right in front of your face is that domed courthouse. And at night, it's all lit up. The dome is actually glass. It's the largest glass dome west of the Mississippi, and it's illuminated with LED lighting from the interior. It is just magical. And, outside of the traditional big cities, New York, San Francisco, it's hard to get that kind of experience and that kind of drama. And it makes Redwood City special.
I agree. It's spectacular. Tell our listeners how the project was funded. So
this all happened in hindsight with perfect timing, because if we had delayed a few years, it all might not have happened, because it was funded with redevelopment funding. Mm-hmm. So the city bonded against its redevelopment tax increment financing and used that to restore the courthouse, to create Courthouse Square, and then also to acquire the cinema site and build a city public parking garage underneath the cinema. The cinema above ground was privately financed. Mm-hmm. We sold the air rights to them. And so using that tool of redevelopment, we were able to get the ball rolling on this whole downtown Redwood City thing.
So we have many listeners, I'm sure, who don't actually understand what that means. Redevelopment. Would you explain?
Sure,
redevelopment,
absolutely.
And then what happens subsequently?
Right. So redevelopment with a little r is just a term for taking an area that already has some development and replacing it with newer development, redeveloping it. Mm-hmm. However, in California, capital R redevelopment means something very specific. And so in the several decades ago, the state created legislation that enabled local communities that had older areas with blight to create a redevelopment zone and form a redevelopment agency. And what that allowed these folks to do is to take advantage of tax increment financing. So the idea is, in these areas, what you do, you designate the blighted area, you create a redevelopment zone, and then that gives this new redevelopment agency special powers to bond and take on debt. And the idea is that you bond, take on debt to create new projects that will raise property values in the area. What happens is the property values, the tax base is there's a line in the sand drawn, and all the values, the value of the pre-redevelopment era is the baseline, and everything below that is distributed to the city and the school districts and the county in the traditional way. Any value that comes in above that as a result of these projects, as land values increase, that is the tax increment, and that is redistributed differently, more heavily to the redevelopment agency, who then can pay off the bonds and do further improvements. So the idea is you take on this debt, you improve the area, the property values rise, and that added value helps you pay off the original debt and do new improvements. And so that is no longer gone. It was eliminated as of January 2012 by the governor and the state legislature. That tool no longer exists. So we took advantage of it in what ended up being its twilight, and we're really benefiting from it.
So let's tell our listeners why the governor, the legislature were motivated to remove this tool, and what cities are doing now without it.
The governor and the legislature were motivated to remove it because that tax increment, the new property values that were created by all this redevelopment activity, that property tax revenue was going very heavily back into the redevelopment agencies, which means money that otherwise would be going to the state coffers were going to these local redevelopment agencies for these improvement projects. And so to help manage the budget gap and help, especially with school funding gaps, the redevelopment agencies were eliminated, so that going forward, a heavier share of these property taxes go to the state to help make the state budget work.
I suppose most people felt like the state had to make some hard choices to get out of the budget crisis that it was in. As the state rights itself, can you imagine that redevelopment tools might come back?
There is talk of that, and I'm not sure if it will play out that way or not. That's an uncertainty, and it will remain to be seen. What we've managed to do in Redwood City, though, is get to a point where we don't necessarily need it to come back in the old way. The main need that we would have, and I think a lot of cities would have, is that funding was really helpful in the creation of affordable housing. And we all know in the Silicon Valley how urgent of a need that is. And so I would expect there to be some movement on that front to at least create some sort of funding pool for affordable housing. But in terms of economic development stimulative projects, what Redwood City has managed to do is use that bonanza of redevelopment activity in the mid-2000s and get a major snowball rolling. And now the private development is coming in response to those investments that we've made. And we don't have to have financing involved, and we don't have to give sites, to developers and help them assemble properties and provide gap financing and do other things that we might have had to do in the past to attract development. Now we've created value in this place with anchors that stimulate activity, with improved public spaces, and with just overall improvements. And so now they want to be there. And then in addition, we have done complete top-to-bottom code reform for all zoning ordinances that apply downtown. And we have a streamlined process. We have codes in place that are clear, easy to follow, and that give developers the density that they need to be profitable. So between those redevelopment investments and the code reform, we're getting all the development that we would hope to get, and we don't need that redevelopment tool to get it.
I have to say, it seems like a model for any city. Redwood City really seems like it has its act together.
It really does. I think it provides a lot of things that other communities can learn from. It's not perfect by any stretch, but we've done really great stuff. And the post redevelopment lessons that we offer for a lot of cities, I think, are especially poignant. The power of some targeted investments to stimulate interest and improve an area, coupled with the code reform and the process reform, go a long way to making the private market really eager to invest.
So let's explore some of these additional details in our next segment. But right now we're going to take a break. You're listening to Inside Silicon Valley. Our guest, Dan Zack. We're talking about urban revitalization and the fabulous example of Redwood City. We'll continue this conversation in just a few moments. Welcome back. You're listening to Inside Silicon Valley. Our guest today is Daniel Zack. He is the Downtown Development Coordinator for the City of Redwood City, and we've been talking about the amazing transformation that you can see in downtown Redwood City. If you haven't been, we highly recommend it. It's a fabulous, vital, exciting place, especially for people on foot. And we've been talking about the choices and the priorities that Redwood City set for itself that made all of this possible. I want to talk about the precise plan, and that's actually a term of art or a technical term, but that's what drove this process. So tell our listeners about precise planning in Redwood City, please.
Absolutely. So we've gone through what I identify as a 3-stage process in our Rensaissance in downtown Redwood City. Stage 1 were these big public investments in public spaces and activity stimulators that I talked about earlier. Stage 2 was going into the zoning and cleaning everything up, and then stage 3 is now this major tidal wave of private development that we have. But that stage 2 was absolutely critical because we knew we were going to get the eyes of the world on us with some of these redevelopment projects, and we wanted that to result in a lot of great private development that really brought the place to the next level. And sometimes the city investments do that, and sometimes they don't. And we wanted to make sure that this was one of the investments that led into the private development. And so what we did is we created what we call the Downtown Precise Plan. And so the Downtown Precise Plan does many things, but the heart of it serves as the zoning for the entire downtown area. And so as a lot of your listeners know, but some of them may not, zoning is rules on what can and can't be built, how tall things can be, how they relate to the street, if they need to be set back from the street, or if they have to be built right up to the street, how much parking is required. All these sorts of things, and what kind of uses can happen. Is residential allowed? Is office allowed? Is retail allowed? Is industrial allowed? And it regulates all of that. And when done well, it can really lead to great results. And when done without much forethought, it can really get in the way of a city accomplishing its goals. So we did not want that to be the case with downtown Redwood City. And so Bruce Leadstrand, the community development director who I had mentioned earlier, brought in the firm of Friedman, Tung, and Sasaki out of San Francisco, and brought them in to help us with that. And Bruce and I and a few others were on a core city staff team working with the consultant team, and together we got the Downtown Precise Plan. And so what the Downtown Precise Plan does is it creates an environment where developers know exactly what is expected of them. They know if they do everything that is expected of them, they will get a quick approval, and they will be able to move forward with some certainty. The Precise Plan errors on the side of certainty as opposed to flexibility. Flexibility and certainty are always at odds in city planning, and it's an impulse that a lot of us have to err on the side of flexibility because we think, well, what could be better than being flexible? But that means you're uncertain. And that means a developer who draws up plans and has an idea and comes to the city really doesn't know if it's going to get approved or not. And so when you have certainty, they can come in with assurances that, hey, look, I'm following the rules. I know exactly what the city wants because they were very clear about it. And, I'm probably going to get approved here because of that. And so that's what we offer. And so one of the goals of the Precise Plan was to make sure that we were allowing enough height and density in order for private development to be profitable, because even before the governor and the legislature were eyeballing redevelopment, we had pretty much maxed out our redevelopment agency's ability to take on debt and stimulate projects and contribute toward development projects. And so we knew, even before redevelopment was officially going away statewide, we knew that for us, this next wave of activity was going to need to be privately financed in Redwood City anyway, because we didn't have a lot of ability to contribute. And so we went into it with the goal of making private development profitable and attractive for folks that might not have previously been interested in building things in Redwood City. And so we actually brought on an economist to help us with a study called the Concord Group. And they looked at land values in downtown Redwood City, what kind of rents were being collected in downtown Redwood City, compared us to neighboring areas that were also getting development, and told us, look, if you guys don't allow at least 8 stories, you're not going to get much built here, because with the return that a developer is going to want in a untested market like downtown Redwood City, but yet you still have these expensive Silicon Valley land values, and the cost of steel and concrete. If you don't have at least 8 stories, you're not going to get much. And so we took that to the council and had a really tough discussion about it. And boy, they took it on with a lot of courage and a lot of intelligence. And they said, you know what? Let's go ahead and let's allow these heights that we need in order to attract the development. And what we'll do with the community to make sure that it works for everybody is these projects will look and feel like Redwood City. They'll contribute to the street life and the beauty of the area, and will make them architecturally fit in and be attractive to the people of Redwood City, so that that we don't have opposition to this. And all of that density is going to enliven downtown Redwood City. Every floor you have added to this building is another floor of people that are going to be down there on the sidewalk, going to shops, eating in restaurants, going to shows, and enlivening the place. And so between helping the council and the public understand the economic need for more height and the revitalization benefits of having more people, which comes with more height, we got the support we needed to move forward with it. And the right height limits got put into place. And as a result, we're getting the development that we had hoped to get.
I want to make sure I have this right. You think that height was an essential factor in the success of your downtown?
Yes, absolutely.
And that was
one of many, but
that was a courageous decision and a milestone, I'm sure, by your council. Mm-hmm. They must have faced a great deal of opposition. Can you speak about this?
There was not a great deal of opposition.
I'm shocked by that.
And the reason for that is that we went to the public from the beginning, before we actually had a plan, and we worked with the public and listened to the public and addressed their concerns from the beginning. And I think we had built up a lot of trust. So by the time we got to the height issue, we knew what our public was really hoping for downtown Redwood City to be. We knew what they were concerned about, and we were able to provide assurances that all of that would be addressed adequately. And so what often happens is the city will hire some experts, and they'll come up with a plan, and then now it's time to sell this to our public. And we did it completely reverse. We went to the public first, and we said, hey, we know we need a downtown plan, but we don't know exactly what it should be. Before we start writing this thing, we want to talk to you all. And, what kind of buildings do you think fit into Redwood City? And what's the look that you're going for? And what things are you worried about? What are things that, we need to really, be aware of that you're worried about? And all that fed into the plan. And so we learned right away, you know what? Redwood City isn't as averse to height as some other communities, so we have opportunities there if we can do it right. But there is a big desire to gracefully transition down into the adjacent low-rise neighborhoods. Built that into the plan. So our height limit for the downtown area is not just 8 stories all around, which is what the economists told us just from a strictly economic point of view we need. Rather, we have this wedding cake arrangement of the allowed building heights. And so in the very center, you can actually go up to 12 stories. And then it tapers down. Most of the area is 8. And then near historic buildings or near the adjacent residential neighborhoods, it tapers down to 5, 4, 3, so that the 2-story neighborhoods across the street from the downtown border are across the street from the 3-story part of downtown. And so that transition is gradual and graceful, and the impact isn't there. And everybody is, for the most part, really on board with this idea that, okay, in the single-family neighborhoods, we leave things alone. They're working well. In neighborhood commercial areas that are within these residential areas, we don't go too crazy with height, 2, 3, 4 stories tops. But downtown, this is the urban part of our city, and this is where we really go all out. And even environmentalists in Redwood City, when they talk about some of the more controversial bayfront areas and other things like that, a lot of them get their point across partially by saying, well, I'm not against all growth. This should be downtown. Put the big stuff downtown, right? That's the place where this goes. So there's pretty widespread. You never get everybody to agree on everything, but there's very much widespread support for the downtown plan and the type of development we're getting.
Do you have any 12-story structures?
Not yet.
Any planned?
The tallest one proposed thus far, which is under review right now, is 10 stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And where would that be?
That would be on the block that is currently occupied by several buildings, but most notably the San Mateo County Credit Union offices, their downtown branch and offices. And so that would be a building that has 3 10-story towers to it that takes up most of the block. And that's under review. And they've done a great job of following the plan. And that'll be the first big one. We have several that are in the 7 to 8 story range also.
Very good. Dan Zack is our guest, and we're talking about urban planning and design. You could say that's a very bad thing to do on radio because we can't look at pictures, we can't point at things, and yet I think, Dan, you're doing a great job so far.
Thanks.
Talk to us about parking. This is an enormous issue that vexes every city council. What has been the approach to parking, and what were the breakthroughs? Well,
unfortunately, in this era and in this place, form follows parking. And so that's unfortunate because, such a utilitarian thing shouldn't really be driving the shape of our cities, but it's a reality and you have to deal with it. And if you don't get it right, it's going to get in your way. And so in Redwood City, we've dealt with parking with sort of a 2-prong approach. So the first prong is the part of parking where the city regulates through its zoning how much parking is required to be built when apartment buildings come in or office buildings or retail shops. Every city in the country pretty much has requirements for parking, and for every 1,000 square feet of office space, you have to provide 5 parking stalls. There are all these formulas. And so the first prong was to get that right, because what we realized was that if those numbers are set too high and are out of whack, it will result in the development that you want not happening or not happening to the magnitude that you want. And so our approach was to require just enough parking so that we didn't develop a problem as development came in, but not require so much that either our landscape was just dominated by asphalt parking lots, which is not going to create a dynamic, enjoyable place, or that we just didn't get any development because the projects didn't pencil out, because these parking stalls are if they're in a parking structure, they're $30,000 to $50,000 a piece to build. And so we didn't want to require 1 stall too many because that's space that's not being occupied by humans, it's being occupied by an idle machine. And so those humans aren't out walking around and buying things and enjoying the city. They're not there because the space was taken up by auto storage. And so we went into our parking requirements and completely gutted them for downtown. We left them intact for the rest of the city because they still made a lot of sense in the more suburban parts of the city. But for the urban piece downtown, we wanted to take a whole different approach. And so what we did was we completely scrapped them and started over, and we built in a recognition of the kind of place we were and we were creating. And that is what we call a park once district, where you come in, you park once, and then you hit everything else on foot from that point, because it's got nice small blocks and interconnected sidewalk network and calm traffic and interesting storefront buildings with things to look at and street trees and street lighting. And so we wanted to respond to that. So park once and walk. Every destination of your evening doesn't need a parking spot. You just need your one parking spot for when you get downtown. Second thing was that we wanted to recognize that we were a mixed-use district and that there are inherent efficiencies built into that. And so, for example, if you build an office park, a conventional, corporate office campus, everybody that drives in is going to need a parking spot all day, right? And then when they leave on their lunch break, they still are going to need a parking spot when they come back. In downtown Redwood City, we are a major employment center. We are a dining and entertainment center. We are becoming a major residential neighborhood, right? We are a civic destination. The county, government center is downtown. And so we have multiple things going on in one spot. And the beauty of that is that each one of them is busy and buzzing at a different time. They need their parking at a different time. And so if you acknowledge that, understand it, you can really maximize efficiency. And so, for example, let's say you have a 100,000 square foot office building right next to a 1,500 seat theater. They're each going to need about 500 parking stalls, right? So if you did it in the conventional suburban way, you're going to need 1,000 parking stalls total, because they each need to function well in a self-contained kind of way. If you build them next to each other downtown with a shared parking garage, you can get away with just the 500 or maybe 550, 600 instead of 1,000, because when the theater is buzzing, the office building is empty. And when the office building is full of workers, the theater isn't doing anything. And so if you understand that and recognize that, you can take advantage of it. So we built that into our parking requirements, and we were able to lower the amount of parking required so that we would get just enough, but we could recognize these inherent efficiencies that we've got, and that has really helped make development pencil out.
Talk about the pricing strategies.
So that's the second prong of the two-prong approach, and that is, how do we manage our public parking? Mm-hmm. And so the approach there was really stimulated by a big parking study that we did in conjunction with the Century Theaters locating downtown. And we looked at every parking stall downtown, public and private. And we had people out in the field counting cars and keeping track of how busy each parking area was throughout the day to do a full comprehensive parking occupancy study. And what we found was that contrary to the popular mythology at the time, we had enough parking. At our busiest time, just over 70% of our parking was occupied. So even at our peak, we had almost 30% of our parking stalls empty and available and waiting. But the reason everybody had this perception, and the reason people were circling around frustrated looking for parking stalls, because the really good ones were jam-packed, 100% full, 24/7, or practically speaking they were. And so what we realized was that we had a management problem, not a supply problem. Now, that was good because we didn't have to pay $30,000 a pop to build our way out of a problem, but we did have to make some hard choices to manage these spaces effectively. So what we did was we researched high and far and wide for effective strategies, and we found this fellow out of UCLA, Professor Donald Shoup, who had done by far the most forward thinking about parking. And he was suggesting that, look, what you need to do is price your parking based on demand. And so more desirable areas that are jammed up, you need to raise the price there. Areas that are empty and underused, you need to drop the price there and use that pricing as a tool to spread people out. And so we took that to heart, and we did that. And we raised prices on Broadway to 50, 75 cents an hour. Unmetered areas along that were really prime, we metered them. We've always had meters, but we filled in some of the blanks, and then we dropped prices in the far out areas that were empty to draw people out there. And then we actually had such faith in the ability of pricing to manage our parking, we got rid of time limits altogether. And so you could park as long as you want, but you were going to pay. what we found was that people did shift. And so monthly permits, the sale of them went up 50% in 1 month after launching the new metering scheme, the new pricing scheme, because employees realized, holy cow, I can't sit for free on Broadway or evade tickets by rubbing the tire chalk off. That meter has to be paid for, or I'm getting a ticket. And paying for a monthly permit in the garage was a much better financial deal. And so rather than using enforcement to encourage people to do the right thing, which means customers going to lunch get caught in the crossfire and pay $40 tickets if they're a little bit too late. Rather than that, we use pricing to incentivize people to spread out. And so it's really helped us deal with the influx of folks and get away with a reasonable amount of parking rather than having to try to build our way out of it and just deaden the landscape with parking garages.
And you took advantage of new technologies as well.
We did. We in really key areas, we replaced the meters with computerized multi-space parking meters. And so instead of a picket fence of parking meters along the curb line on Broadway, we just have 1 meter per block. And so each stall at the curb is numbered. You go to the meter and you enter the number and pay there. The beauty of that, in addition to cleaning up the streetscape, was that it allowed us to accept multiple forms of payment. So you don't have to worry about having a pocket full of quarters. You can just go in, pop in your credit card, your debit card, or even a dollar bill, and pay for your parking that way, and then you're done with it. We even have it set up so that you can pay by cell phone. And the beauty of paying by cell phone is 5 minutes before your parking expires, you get a text message and it asks you if you want to add more time. And if so, you can just add more time right there from the restaurant or wherever you might be.
It's absolutely fantastic. Dan Zack is our guest. We're talking about urban planning issues and the fabulous design choices that they've made in Redwood City. We're going to go to break, listen to these messages, and then join us for the conclusion of our conversation with Dan Zack. Welcome back. You're listening to Inside Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Russell Hancock. Our guest this week, Dan Zack, and we're talking about Redwood City and its remarkable transformation, and Dan is very much at the center of that. You know, a lot of this boils down to basic choices about aesthetics, and taste is a very controversial issue. So I'm curious to know about the design choices that you ultimately made and how they were made. And I want to talk about the stuff that's just right there on the street. I'm talking about the benches and the lanterns and the street lights and the newspaper boxes. Tell me about all of that.
Well, there's a certain amount of it that is very subjective and a certain amount of it that's universal. And so what we really tried to focus on was the universal things. And what do all of these great places that we admire have in common, and what can we learn from them and build into Redwood City? So, you know, starting at the pedestrian scale, you know, you want to have sidewalks that are wide enough so that people can walk in groups and pass and not be squeezed down. You don't want them so big that they feel empty, you know, but you want them big enough where people can move around comfortably. We didn't focus, for the most part, on fancy paving materials and you know, cobblestones and all of that. What we did was we tried to proportion everything right, have enough width, and then have excellent street trees that can be limbed up so that you can get the shade, but you can still see the business signage, and you can get that cathedral ceiling of the tree canopy ultimately when they grow out. Decorative pedestrian scale street lighting, so not the Caltrans model Cobra lamps that you would get on the freeway, but rather something scaled down at the 12-foot range instead of the 20-foot range that lights up the sidewalk and is attractive to look at. And then the buildings. You know, we have strict requirements in the downtown precise plan for what we call frontage, and that's where the building hits the sidewalk, and that part of the building has to be very interesting. We want storefront windows. We actually have requirements that you have to be able to see in 20 feet to the building because we want, you know, there to be that interaction. There's rules for how frequently there need to be doors so that you have people coming and going. We don't want one door buried in the middle of the block and then the rest of it is empty. We want people coming and going. So what we did with the cinema, for example, it's a 20-screen theater that takes up about 85,000 square feet. It takes up the whole footprint of the block, but we put it up on the second level. And the ground level is just the cinema lobby. You take the escalators up, and the rest of the ground floor is, you know, Five Guys and the Spaghetti Factory and Cost Plus and a whole host of restaurants and shops, so that when you're walking around the perimeter of this thing, you don't just have the cinema lobby and then nothing. You have the cinema lobby, then you have a burger joint, then you have an ice cream place, then you have a shoe store, so it's very lively and interesting. And so even when you have a big activity center that takes up a large footprint, you can still wrap it with small active things so that you have this good rhythm of doors and entrances that all the classic cities have, and that's really important for that pedestrian comfort.
You've made really great design choices. I'm talking about the choice of the device itself, the implement itself, the actual lamp that you chose. Mm-hmm. It's appealing. It, to me, seems like it's in really good taste. This doesn't just happen. What just happens is what you see on most streets, which is some ugly fixture that assaults your sensibilities. Mm-hmm. That means, therefore, that somebody in Redwood City was really looking out for this. And I'm guessing heading off the naysayers and putting a stake in the ground. We're going to have a higher aesthetic standard. Mm-hmm. Am I right? And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of that could be traced back to Bruce coming in as community development director, and he in his Mountain View days had really picked up the bug for urban design and aesthetics and beauty, and so when he brought in Friedman, Tongue, and Bottomley to help with the precise plan, they also helped with all of the streetscape improvements that came in as part of the cinema and Courthouse Square. And so between Bruce's infectious enthusiasm for design that really carried over to all of the staff, and then FTB's expertise, Friedman, Tongue, and Bottomley now, Friedman, Tongue, and Sasaki, between their expertise with the actual designs, the push has been there and is maintained there. A lot of us would go to conferences like the Congress for the New Urbanism and learn about this stuff and get excited. We would even have council members and traffic engineers that would go with us to these design conferences because that the bug was picked up. And it's fun. When the charge is given to you to create a place that's beautiful and enjoyable, you'd be amazed at who gets on board and who gets excited about it. But oftentimes that's not the charge. It's not even really on the radar screen. And if it is, it's just an afterthought. But that was integrated into the core purpose of this thing from the beginning. And it shows. And so we have a city landscape architect, which most cities don't even have. We have, all of our planning staff has been trained on design as well as implementing zoning codes. And so we all have a passion for it, and that plays out in the design of our streets. And when we review buildings and work with developers to really make them great, it carries out into all of that too. And so it's fun stuff. And most planners aren't given the latitude to go there, and we were, and we all were really excited to go there, and I think it's manifested itself as an attractive place.
A beautiful street light probably costs more money mm-hmm. than a plain functional one. Mm-hmm. So you had to stand down critics mm-hmm. On grounds of cost. We see it as an investment. Right, and so if you invest in nicer equipment from the beginning, the benefit will come back to the city in the sense of more economic development, more tax revenues later on down the line. And I think that everybody really understood that and was willing to make that greater investment up front and really do it right. Dan, Zack, we don't have much time left. Tell me what other cities you admire.
Well, I am a major city buff, and so the fun thing about working in Redwood City is that I've been able to really contribute to someplace great. But I respect a lot of cities far and wide, and I travel a lot. I have a blog actually where I talk about some of my favorite places. And,
tell the listeners.
And it's www.plannerdan.com.
Plannerdan.com.
So if you want to go there, there's a gallery of places I've visited and things I've learned from other cities. I muse on that stuff, and so. A lot of them are the typical places. Every planner loves Portland, Oregon. I mean, they've done unbelievable, amazing stuff in Portland, Oregon. The things going on in New York City with the traffic commissioner, Jeanette Sadik-Khan, is amazing. And, of course, Europe, the classic European cities. How do you not go to Paris and Florence and be completely inspired and infected with a desire to bring the same greatness to your hometowns? And then, America, has a lot of great, small, historic towns that are just really inspiring. Here in California, San Luis Obispo, Expo, Santa Barbara. I mean, they're everywhere. And I go to these places not only to have fun, but to learn.
It's been a really fun conversation. There's so much more we could have covered. Will you come back?
I'd love to.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Dan Zack has been our guest. He's the Downtown Development Coordinator for Redwood City, and we've talked all about their wonderful transformation. You've been listening to Inside Silicon Valley. We hope you'll join us again next week. We'll be having a conversation with Connie Martinez about the state of the arts in Silicon Valley. We'll see you again. Signing off, this is Russell Hancock on 1590 KLIV.